The Detroit Lions are not an easy opponent for the Chicago Bears, but they provide a few favorable matchups this week that'll go a long way towards the Bears improving some of their biggest issues from week one.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Mazda. Like our players, Mazda sweats every details because when you make every move count, pulling off the unexpected is only the beginning. So stay tuned later for highlights in this week's Moving the Game Forward. Mazda, move and be moved. On the show today, I want to look at what the Chicago Bears can do to improve this week and why the Lions present a nice matchup to be able to do so. That doesn't mean guaranteed victory, win, success, but cleaning up a lot of those mistakes and feeling better about the direction of the team after week two. It starts with the Caleb Williams and the offense, where I think the Lions matchup will be a contrast to the Vikings in some key ways that will help this offense settle in a little bit more. And then I think defensively, we saw what the Green Bay Packers did to the Lions in week one, and there's a nice formula there that fits nicely with what Chicago can do to keep holding down Jared Goff and company. And then I think we'll wrap up with some of the other like little low-hanging fruit things that the Bears can clean up that shouldn't be that difficult and have a lot of control over them handling themselves. But I think when I look at the Bears offense trying to get better from week one to week two, there will be a lot of it that's just, hey, you're not facing Brian Flores' defense anymore, and that makes everyone's job a little bit easier. I mean, he's one of the more well-respected defensive coordinators in football for a reason, and it's not to say that the Lions' defense isn't also very talented and well-coached, but I think the specific stresses Flores puts on are a little bit different than what the Bears will be facing this week. Because, don't get me wrong, the Lions are also a heavy blitzing defense. It's not as though the Lions are going to be conservative and just sit back and do a four-man rush and, let Caleb sit in the pocket all day and have, nothing to worry about there. But the ways they each blitz are a little bit different. And specifically, I think in the context for Chicago, it is what they put behind the blitz from a coverage standpoint. That Brian Flores, especially in week one, mixed up all sorts of different zone coverages he blitzed out of. They were running cover 2 behind the blitz sometimes, cover 3, cover 6, a wide variety of mainly zones hidden behind the blitz. So it wasn't super clear always like, okay, blitz is coming, but then what coverage do I have behind it? You don't have as much time to quickly diagnose the coverage when you know the blitz is coming, and it becomes harder to function as a quarterback. The Lions, on the other hand, when they blitz, it's more exclusively a single high coverage. The Lions don't run a lot of two deep coverages in general. They want another guy up near the box. Now, they split that a little bit between cover 1 and cover 3, man and zone, but generally it's a little bit of a quicker and easier read for Caleb Williams when the blitz is coming. And in general, whether they're blitzing or not, the Lions are still one of the higher ratios of man coverage in general. They run a lot of cover 1, probably more than anybody else in football, and some 2-man and some other variations of that. But it's going to be, generally speaking, easier reads for the quarterback. It's just a little bit less complex of a coverage matrix on the back end. And I think when Caleb Williams sees man coverage and when Ben Johnson knows he's getting man coverage, it's very easy to, or it's a lot easier to dial up plays to attack that coverage, as opposed to Flores. There's no plays that are universally going to beat all zone. There's man coverage beaters, but then each for zone coverage, there's some plays that are some route concepts that are better for cover 2 and some that are better for cover 3, and they're not always, they don't usually apply across. And so it's harder to know what coverage the Vikings were going to be in, so then it's harder to call a play specific to that coverage and kind of play that guessing game. The Lions are 50 to 60% of the time they're just in man coverage. It might be one safety or two safeties or no safeties deep, but your receivers are going to have man coverage on a lot of the plays. So you can kind of go in knowing that they're not going to out scheme you defensively, and that Caleb can trust his eyes a little bit more and then not have to rush it and not have to be, trying to sort of hurry through things. He can just kind of let the plays come to him a little bit more. Now, the Bears also struggled with the interior of the offensive line being an issue last week against the Vikings. That was something that the Lions' interior, the defensive line, wasn't phenomenal for them either, especially from a pass rush standpoint. So that should be a little bit positive in the matchup department. And I think from a Bears perspective, if Jonah Jackson and Drew Dahlman are struggling, you can have DeAndre Swift or Kyle Monangai stay in pass protection on the interior a little bit more and try and fill in the A gap or one of the B gaps around there. You can't just leave Braxton Jones on an island versus Aiden Hutchinson on one side. You can't overcommit to helping the inside and, leave yourself a less favorable matchup on the edge. But I do think there's room for this offensive line to settle in a little bit more in week 2 and room to run the ball more successfully as well. Generally, Detroit was loading up the box a little bit against the Packers, and the Lions with both Montgomery and Gibbs couldn't get the running game going exactly the way they wanted to. And I think you saw the Packers and Aaron Jones also have mixed bag in the running game. And the way I saw it is Jones couldn't find a ton of room in the middle, but the Packers against the Lions defense were having more success bouncing things off outside to the edge. They ripped off a big run in outside zone. They had a nice counter play where they got to the edge, pin and pull. But when they were trying to pound it up the middle, they had a little bit more trouble there. And so I think this matchup should bode well for trying to get DeAndre Swift out in space. Not that he's going to have some huge 150-yard game. I'm not saying start DeAndre Swift in fantasy necessarily, just saying for how much the Bears struggled in the ground game last week, I think they can get to the edge a little bit more against the Lions. And as a result, then maybe mitigate some of the run blocking issues on the interior. When Dahlman and Jonah Jackson struggled there, if you just don't run behind them, if you get farther out to the edge, yes, their blocks matter for cutbacks and everything, but maybe they're not quite right at the point of attack, and it gives DeAndre Swift then a little bit more room to read and react and work in space, as opposed to running in where there's no space right away up the middle of the field. So I expect the Bears offense to be much improved. Not totally solved, not totally fixed, not totally Ben Johnson's wide open offense. Because again, you are still going to get blitzed a lot, and that is going to force you to throw shorter and get rid of the ball more quickly and have to account for the blitz with extra blockers or moving pockets, right? You do have to scheme for the blitz still. But I just think it'll be an easier time for Caleb Williams especially, but I think as well for the offensive line and a little bit for the running game and the receivers as well there. And you can feel like the offense is going to take steps forward in this matchup. Same thing is true for the defense, where we saw the Packers absolutely shut down the Lions offense in ways that the Bears should be able to emulate well and should have the horses to kind of keep up. There's no mystery on what you need to do against the Detroit Lions. It's just a matter of being able to do it. And as the Bears seem to be getting at least a little bit healthier, that should become a little bit more attainable. So we'll take a look at that side of the matchup before we get to some easy stuff that the Bears can fix, whether it's Detroit or anybody they're facing this week next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by DoorDash. It's almost the weekend. Time to look back and crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving money every time you order, these players delivered when it mattered most. Let's break it down. For the Chicago Bears, we saw Nashawn Wright step up and deliver in a big way. A pick six, jumping the route against Justin Jefferson and taking it back to the house, 76 yards for the score. It was a tough matchup. The pressure was definitely on Nashawn Wright in this game, but he came through. In that moment, no hesitation, no delay. And just like Wright delivered for the Bears, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays with DoorDash Streaks. You're saving every Saturday you order. So stack it up all season, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period through November 18th. Locked On Bears is also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The NFL season is here, And FanDuel is making sure you're ready for every kickoff with a can't-miss offer, because right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. So you could bet $5 on Bears-Lions, where the spread keeps moving towards the Lions. Bears are now 6.5-point underdogs on the road. The money line is Bears plus 220 if you want to bet them straight up. And the over-under point total is set at 47.5 points. A $5 bet on any of those or any other game or any of your other favorite sports, if you win, not only do you get the winnings from your $5 bet, but then an extra $300 in bonus bets to use wherever you want. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. This game plan for the Lions offense is no mystery or difficult plan that you have to concoct each week. We kind of know how this Lions offense ticks. And more importantly, Ben Johnson knows generally how this Lions offense ticks. There's always little wrinkles each and every year, and it is a new coordinator, new play call, and there's things that are different in that regard. But what's the same is what they want to do. And what's the same is what we have always known about Jared Goff, is that Jared Goff is a quarterback who, more so than a lot of others, really struggles under pressure. Like, we know that every quarterback generally is worse under pressure. Like, you want to keep your quarterback clean. If there was a quarterback that was better under pressure, that would be insane. But Jared Goff is especially derailed by pressure. The contrast in his passing performance when kept clean and under pressure is much more drastic than almost every other quarterback in the NFL, certainly veteran quarterbacks like him. Like, that's always been the way to get to the Lions. And the Lions were always able to successfully mitigate that, or consistently able to do so, with a really, really strong offensive line. But the interior of that line has changed significantly and is no longer nearly as strong as it was. We heard on yesterday's podcast from Matt Deary from Locked On Lions. You got a rookie right guard in Tate Ratledge, who was up and down in week one. A left guard is a young guy, Christian Mahogany, was their 6th-round pick last year. Still a 6th-round pick starting at left guard. And then their center, Graham Glasgow, is a veteran, but has felt a little bit over the hill at 33 and maybe not as sharp as he was when he was a younger player. And so there's a real vulnerability on the interior that Ben Johnson absolutely knows, and you certainly know that Dennis Allen will know that too. And so the plan should and will absolutely be attack that interior, pressure Jared Goff. Now, one of the interesting things about Goff is that he's really good against the blitz, right? So it's not like the plan is just send the house at him every time, because he's very good at reading the blitz, getting the ball out quickly into the hands of a playmaker. And the Lions have good enough playmakers in Gibbs and Montgomery and Laporta and Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams that if you get the ball in the hands and there's fewer guys back in coverage, they can make plays. Like, blitzing Jared Goff is not necessarily the clear answer there, but it is about finding ways to generate that pressure up the middle, which sometimes can include blitzing. But you better be sure your blitz is getting home quickly, because he can take advantage of it if they do pick it up correctly. But for me, it's more about, it's not about trying to confuse the offense, it's not about trying to confuse the quarterback, but it is about trying to test the communication of a new interior, just like we saw the Bears offensive line fail with that this past week. So that means stunts and twists and taking defensive ends and looping them inside and seeing if the center and the guard can pass off their blocks and pick up that end, or having the two tackles cross each other and go around, right? Trying to find ways to collapse the top of that pocket. Some of that's just going to need to be your interior pass rushers winning their one-on-ones. Gervon Dexter has the chance to make a big impact in this game, especially with, Grady Jarrett potentially sidelined for this one, not practicing so far this week. We'll see how that plays out. Like, it's going to mean a lot more Andrew Billings and Chris Williams playing on the interior. I didn't think they played particularly well against the Vikings, but perhaps a more favorable matchup this week against Detroit. And I'd be surprised, but we could see Shamar Turner make his Chicago Bears debut if Grady Jarrett's hurt. I don't think we'll see Turner play a lot, given that he missed pretty much all of training camp in the preseason, but he could have a few opportunities in there. And then things like getting your linebackers up in their face, and you can run what they call sim pressures, where it's like a blitz, but you're not actually blitzing. where you look like you're sending 6 guys and you have all 6 guys step forward and then 2 guys drop back into coverage, but the offensive line thinks 6 guys are coming, so they step and react towards that. And then by simulating a blitz, but then not actually blitzing, you can attack holes in their pass protection that was designed to pick up a blitz, but now you have 2 guys blocking one or 1 guy blocking nobody because he thought he had a blitzer coming, and then you have an extra guy coming somewhere else. Like you can find different ways to work with that, especially in Dennis Allen's dime package that we saw last week. When what he would do is he would take 1 defensive lineman out. So the Bears did a lot of this where they'd have 3 down linemen and then 2 linebackers and then 6 DBs behind them. And so you can have all 5 of those guys at the line of scrimmage, your 3 down linemen and then your 2 linebackers all up at the line of scrimmage. Last week it was a lot of like Sweat, Odengbo, and then Dexter are your 3. You have 2 ends and a nose tackle, and then linebackers on either side of Dexter. And everybody steps forward like they're all rushing the passer, but then maybe one of the linebackers drops back. So it's still a 4-man rush. So you still have your full 7-man covered. You're not taking anybody extra out of coverage, but it feels like a blitz to the offensive line. So they spread for that, but then you get better matchups and can kind of send guys in a lot more cleanly back to the quarterback. So that's where you have to be smart about it, but you absolutely can mess with the interior of this offensive line and make Jared Goff's life more difficult. And then you look at last week for the Lions against the Packers. They couldn't run the ball against Green Bay. And you go back and watch that game, I think I counted 19 out of the 20 handoffs the Lions gave to Gibbs and David Montgomery. There were a minimum of 7 guys in the box. And more than half of those plays, there were 8 or more guys in the box. The Packers loaded up the box. And part of that is to stop the run for sure, and I think the Bears need to do that same thing. But part of that then is so you can threaten the offensive line with these simulated fake blitzes or blitz if you want to. Like more guys closer to the line of scrimmage gives more of a threat for the offensive line to assess, even if you're not bringing it every time, and it becomes harder to run against. And then, of course, when you have 8 guys in the box, then you don't have as much help on the deep end. You need your cornerbacks to be able to hold up against Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jamison Williams. But I think there's a feeling like the broader strategy here is load up the box, be ready to stop the run, get that pressure up the middle, and really, if you can take away those quick first reads for Goff so that he's not able to get it out right away in those 2.5 seconds and make him then progress later in the progression, that's what then gives your pass rush that time to get him under pressure, and then he makes mistakes, right? You run into the problem when he snaps it, turns, and gets the ball out super quickly to a receiver who's open in space because you blitzed or because your coverage was bad or whatever. But like if you can just make him hold on to that extra second so that your pass rush can then disrupt him and you're stopping the run along the way because you've loaded the box, like that's how the Lions offense fell apart against the Packers. And that's exactly what the Chicago Bears are in a pretty good position to do here, is to just load up the box, because the injury situation is giving you what appears to be some improvements in your front 7. We'll talk about them in a minute. Yeah, obviously the secondary is getting a little bit healthier too, so you feel like those guys can hold up a little bit better. Like you're not asking your corners to run with Jamison Williams for 5 seconds or Amon-Ra St. Brown up and down all over the field. But if you could just kind of take away that first quick move, and maybe you got to take your chances that a double move isn't going to be able to burn you because you got to trust that your pass rush is going to get home or that your safety is able to help you. But I just think you can stack this up properly to make this defense's job a lot easier against the Lions. And considering we saw this defense play really well for 3.5 quarters against the Vikings, I think there's some reason to believe they can do it again against Detroit. Doesn't mean pitching a shutout, doesn't mean they won't give up points, right? But I think you can emulate a lot of what the Packers did and give yourself a chance to stay in this game. And then on top of all that, on top of the game plan specific, opponent specific stuff, I just think there's some really easy, low-hanging fruit the Bears can clean up that should just kind of come naturally, that you can have a lot of control over being able to fix from week to week. So we'll take a look at some of the other things that should just naturally get better from week 1 to week 2 next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by Mazda's Moving the Game Forward. For those who believe it's not just about playing the game, it's about redefining it. There are moments that do more than just put points on the board. They move crowds, they move culture, and they keep the game moving forward. I'm thinking specifically of Caleb Williams' 9-yard touchdown run, where he was 10 for 10 to start that game and driving the Bears offense on the field. But even when his passing options were taken away, right? And he's under pressure and he escapes the pocket. Like, to be able to finish that play with his legs in the end zone, Caleb showed us even like a next level of mobility that we knew he was always mobile, but like he was outrunning Vikings pass rushers last week in a way that I think invigorates this offense and says he can make up for when other people have made mistakes. See, when you follow what moves you, the unexpected is only the beginning. And just like there's more to every highlight, there's more to every Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. Some aspects of the Bears' struggles in week 1 felt like a reflection of a team in its first game with a new head coach, with new offensive and defensive systems, and some new teammates out there. Right? Some of it was sloppiness that I'm not going to like excuse or say, oh, it's not a big deal. It's all right to have 12 penalties for 127 yards. But it's also okay to say, oh, that's pretty fixable. Like a big problem, real problem, absolutely needs to be fixed, cannot be overlooked and ignored, but also not a permanent problem that you just can't solve in season, right? Like sometimes it's like, oh, you realize you're not good enough at a position and there's no way you can upgrade that position midseason, so you just got to stick with what you got. Like that's not the case when it comes to penalties, right? Think about all the false starts the Bears had in week 1. Like that feels to me like an offensive line with 3 new starters, all running a new system with a new quarterback they haven't worked with before and just trying to get that snap count on the same page. And making those mistakes, bad, inexcusable, hurt the Bears and contributed to losing the game. But also something you can now get together during the week and really fixate on and hammer out snap counts and practice the silent count that they're going to need against Detroit and absolutely clean that up. And I think just generally, some of the penalties in that game were certainly very disagreeable. The Darnell Wright holding call comes to mind, but there were others too that maybe were a little ticky-tacky and not necessarily going to keep popping up because crews just aren't going to be that consistently wrong all the time. They're going to get calls wrong, but not that often, all the time, that egregiously. Or like think about Caleb Williams' intentional grounding where he's scrambling out of the pocket and it's like tripped up, and as he's going to the ground, he just tries to get rid of it to avoid the sack, but can't get to the line of scrimmage, goes down as an intentional grounding. Like that's not the kind of error that's going to keep happening. Right? I mean, it's sort of, I don't want to downplay it by saying it's fluky, but it's not, it's more of an anomaly, right? Like he doesn't get a lot of intentional grounding. Like he just needed to get it to the line of scrimmage. And he knows what he did wrong, and he's not going to make those same mistakes over and over again. Like the penalties should clean up quickly. Not to say there'll be 0 penalties, but you're not going to get 12 for 127 every week. Like that's just not, this is a grown-up NFL coaching staff. They'll be fine. Same thing with like communication up front, right? When it comes to the false starts and the formations and the penalties and the motions and stuff, like it's just stuff that takes time and they'll work through that they can fix from week 1 to week 2, essentially independent of whoever the opponents were going to be in those games. And maybe Brian Flores' blitzes challenge that communication a little bit more, but the Lions are going to blitz you a little bit too, but I don't think they're going to challenge the communication quite in the same way that Brian Flores did. And now these guys having another full week of working together and actually like seeing the things they need to fix, as opposed to going in the season thinking you got everything together and now, it exposed some things we need to fix. Now we can really focus on those specific things and solve those for week 2 against the Lions. I'll throw special teams in this same category where it didn't feel to me, and I'm no special teams expert, so I'm not trying to have a definitive, ruling on this, but it didn't feel to me like the Bears' struggles on special teams against the Vikings were because the Vikings were doing something super special on special teams. Like the blocked punt or the partially blocked punt, your safety Elijah Hicks is blocking and the guy beats him to the inside. Like I don't think it was like some special scheme the Vikings drew up. I think it was just like a good play by the guy who blocked it and a bad block by Elijah Hicks. Like that's just a one-on-one X's or that's a Jimmy's and Joe's thing, not an X's and O's thing that they'll work on and clean up and fix the technique there. And they're probably not going to have a punt blocked again this week. Same thing with like the coverage units. Like they outrun the Vikings. Like the Vikings return guy had some talent for sure. I don't want to take away that when he creates yards there, it is something he is contributing to, but like you can clean up your discipline on some of those special teams coverage units. And, Cairo Santos didn't miss that field goal because of something the Vikings did. It wasn't blocked. It wasn't, I don't even know what else it would be, right? Like the Vikings didn't make him miss that field goal. He missed that field goal. Like that, those are things you can clean up from an operation to make sure the snap and the hold are proper, to make sure Kairos Santos' plant foot was where it needed to, and his leg swing was at the angle it needed to. I mean, all the different things that it's purely just on him and on the special teams unit to clean up and get right. And there's a reasonable expectation that not all of those things are going to keep going wrong on special teams, and that their job is to absolutely clean those things up. And then we can throw in there that injuries were a factor in week one, not an excuse, but a factor. And you are getting healthier in two key spots, even if you're maybe losing a little bit something in another spot, where in week one, didn't have Jalen Johnson, didn't have TJ Edwards. So far, we're seeing at practice through 2 days, TJ Edwards has been limited both days, and Jalen Johnson has been a full participant both days. So Jalen Johnson himself said he's going to play on Sunday. So we can count on him being in. So there's an upgrade at corner. Presumably Nashawn Wright then moves to the bench. And if TJ Edwards is indeed good to go with the hamstring, that takes Noah Sewell off the field and removes a weakness in coverage. You also have Josh Blackwell limited instead of missing practice, so he could be your new slot option because Kyler Gordon seems unlikely to play, and so he could be an upgrade over Nick McLeod. Could even get Roshan back, who's been limited to practice. I just think while Gordon and Grady Jarrett are both definitely like real concerns and players that you don't want to be missing, and don't want to be without, the potential returns of Edwards, Blackwell, Roshan, and then the for sure return of Jalen Johnson will be an improvement for this Bears team. Like that's another way you're just kind of automatically getting better. And it absolutely changes the matchup and changes the Dennis Allen's game plan when you have Jalen Johnson on one side as opposed to it being Nashawn Wright, who had the pick six and made some plays, but like is not Jalen Johnson. And even though Jalen Johnson might not be 100% game shape midseason form, I still think he'll be just fine and someone you can absolutely rely on there. I'm most worried about the slot at this point because Amon-Ra St. Brown plays a lot in the slot. And so whether that's Josh Blackwell or Nick McLeod, I will really wish it was Kyler Gordon out there. And I'm sure Amon-Ra St. Brown will make a few plays. Like the Bears are not, in all likelihood, the Bears are not going to hold the Lions to the 13 points that the Packers did this past week. And in all likelihood, this is going to be a close, difficult, hard-fought game. And honestly, we talked about this on yesterday's crossover podcast. It's really hard for me to trust that the Bears are going to win until we actually see them do it for 4 quarters. Because we saw them do it for 3 quarters, and that wasn't even enough last week. And so I'm not going to fall for it until we actually see them do it. Because at the end of the day, as bad as the Lions looked in week one, like they have been the better team and have most of the same players from the team last year that was very clearly the better team. And so until the Bears and the Lions prove head-to-head otherwise, we should expect the Lions to be the better team. The Lions will also clean up and fix a lot of the things they did wrong in week one. And the Lions are looking at the Bears saying some of the same things we did today, where it's like the Lions are like, oh, we can fix that, and that against the Bears. And the Lions think they're going to get right. They're going to right the ship, and they're going to get back to midseason form against the Bears, just like the Bears think they're going to fix all their stuff against the Lions. I think in reality, both teams will probably be able to fix a lot of their stuff against each other, and I think it'll probably be closer than Lions fans want to think it is. And from there, again, I'm not ready to predict a Bears victory just yet, but it's easy to talk yourself into. Even easier than it was, I think, in week one against the Vikings. And yet, if you had to bet on which team is more likely to start 0-2, the Bears or the Lions, I think nationally it would be pretty universal that the Bears are more likely to start 0-2 this season than the Lions. So we'll see. I think there's good reason for optimism and good reason to not panic, but we can stop short of saying, oh, the Bears are going to have some easy victory over the Lions then either. Like, no, I think it'll be a good game. Should be fun to watch. Whatever happens, win, lose, or God forbid a tie, you can be sure we'll break it down for you right here in the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. We'll be live in the Locked On Bears YouTube channel after the game wraps up. Me and Joe George be breaking down everything we saw in that game, but then the podcast will still be back for you on Monday to be your first listen. Once again, if you need a second listen in between now and then, be sure to check out Locked On NFL for more football talk, Locked On Lions for more intel on the Bears' opponent, or any of the other Locked On shows for any of your favorite teams across all of sports. Just come back on Monday, listen to another episode of Locked On Bears, be a part of the conversation, and in exchange, I'll always make sure you get another opportunity to bear down.